St. Mary's General Hospital, renowned for its cutting-edge care in a prosperous suburban area, stood poised on the cusp of a new trial. Angela Parker, a capable black nurse, never suspected that deep-seated biases would emerge the moment she came on board. The atmosphere gradually simmered with tension, conflict spiraled, and a nondescript patient named Thomas Edwards watched quietly from his hospital bed. Yet, Mr. Edwards was not merely another patient. His presence would alter every dynamic that St. Mary's prided itself on. What veiled authority did he possess, and how could Angela's personal battle spark a systemic shift? We will uncover these answers in due course. Before proceeding, share in the comments where you are reading from. If this account's unforeseen twists and episodes of justice resonate with you, do remember to subscribe. Down the polished corridors of St. Mary's, Angela Parker made her entrance. She inhaled the sharp scent of antiseptics, detecting beneath it a subtle tension that unsettled her stomach. With firm resolve, she lifted her chin, determined to display composure on her first day. Approaching the nurse's station, she noticed voices dropping to low murmurs, fleeting glances darting away from her, as though reluctant to meet her eyes. Fighting a pang of isolation, she cleared her throat. "Hello," she said, maintaining an even tone. "I'm Angela Parker, the new nurse. Could you point me to the head nurse's office?" A fair-haired nurse glanced up. Momentary surprise lit her blue eyes, which quickly cooled. "Certainly," she responded, voice courteous yet reserved. "Down the hall, third door to the right." Nodding politely, Angela moved on, acutely aware that watchful gazes trailed her. The faint click of her sensible shoes seemed deafening, each step intensifying her apprehension. Near the office, a tall man in a pristine white coat stepped out of a room. His salt-and-pepper hair and commanding air suggested a senior doctor. Angela's heartbeat quickened. Perhaps she might develop a more positive connection here. "Good morning, doctor," she greeted him, smiling. "I'm Angela Parker, the new nurse. It's a pleasure to meet you." His gray eyes scanned her coolly. "I'm Dr. William Greaves," he said curtly. "Have you been adequately oriented to our procedures?" Angela was about to answer, but he pressed on. "We have lofty standards at St. Mary's," he declared. "I trust you're ready to uphold them." Without waiting for her reply, he strode past, leaving Angela with her hand still extended. Deflated though she felt, she refused to abandon her composure. She inhaled deeply, squared her shoulders, and knocked on the head nurse's door. Memories of her time in nursing school flooded in. Angela recalled her mother's words, warm with pride and worry. "Baby girl," her mother had said, "you'll have to work twice as hard. But don't show them any weakness. You come from strong women, and that strength is yours." She remembered extra lab hours, late-night revision, and the unrelenting pressure to prove herself. There had been veiled dismissals from certain instructors and hushed speculation from classmates who doubted she belonged. But Angela excelled, graduating at the top of her class, her skills silencing all detractors. Now, awaiting a response at the head nurse's door, she thought of those hard-won triumphs. She had endured far worse and refused to waver. The door swung open to reveal a middle-aged woman with a stern demeanor. "Miss Parker," she inquired, clipped and brisk. "Come in. We have much to cover, and I expect you to keep up." Following her inside, Angela sensed she was stepping into a realm fraught with tension, a silent tempest concealed by professional pleasantries and immaculate floors. She had no notion that her arrival would soon rattle the institution's entrenched prejudices and bring hidden toxicity to the surface. That first day rushed past in a tornado of paperwork, training, and official introductions. Yet every time Angela approached a group, she detected a pervasive unease. Conversations ceased abruptly, whispering resumed only once she passed. Her attempts at friendly banter yielded polite nods but no genuine warmth, leaving her more and more on the outskirts of the group. By day's end, she was exhausted mentally and emotionally. While retrieving her belongings from the locker room, she overheard hushed voices around the bend. "Have you met the new nurse yet?" one said. "I can't believe they hired her," the other whispered back. Not exactly the type for this neighborhood, right? Angela felt her spirits plummet. She had convinced herself that her chilly reception was merely new job jitters, but it was now painfully obvious these sentiments ran deeper. Boarding the bus that evening, doubts churned in her mind. She pressed her phone to her ear, welcoming the familiar voice that answered after 2 rings. "Hey, baby girl, first day done. How'd it go?" Tears threatened to surface, but Angela steadied herself. "It was rough, Mama," she admitted quietly. Her mother sighed, then spoke resolutely. "Angela Marie Parker, you worked too hard to be demeaned. Remember your roots. You're blazing a trail for others, not just yourself." The memory of her mother's unwavering faith enveloped Angela, reinforcing her resolve. "Yes, Mama," she said softly. "Thank you." Hanging up, she noticed a sleek Mercedes gliding past. Behind the tinted window sat Dr. Greaves, his gaze momentarily connecting with hers before the car zoomed off. Channeling her mother's fortifying words, Angela stood straighter. This place would test her, but she had come too far to yield. She was not alone. Her family's support lay in her corner. If she had to fight she would. In the following weeks, working conditions for Angela Parker became more oppressive. The initial aloofness turned into pointed exclusion. Minor differences in how she and her white colleagues were regarded grew more blatant. Especially Dr. Greaves appeared to savor any opportunity to criticize her. "Nurse Parker," he called one morning in the hustle and bustle of the nursing station, "are you quite sure you know St. Mary's protocols inside out? We can't afford mistakes." His stress on mistakes made her spine tingle. Meeting his glare, she replied calmly, "Absolutely, doctor. I've learned all relevant hospital procedures." He arched an eyebrow, nodding as though unconvinced. "We'll see, won't we?" Without a shred of subtlety, her superiors saddled her with the most complicated and unruly patience. Her colleagues, in contrast, usually managed more routine tasks. "Angela," someone asked her sweetly, "could you look after Mr. Johnson in 305? He's in a mood again." She recognized challenging was an understatement. Mr. Johnson had repeatedly reduced staff to tears. Regardless, Angela methodically prepped herself, determined to meet the challenge. "What are you doing here, girl?" Mr. Johnson spat the moment she walked in. "Didn't I say I don't want no colored nurses messing around with me?" Without a shred of subtlety, her superiors saddled her with the most complicated and unruly patience. Her colleagues, in contrast, usually managed more routine tasks. "Angela," someone asked her sweetly, "could you look after Mr. Johnson in 305? He's in a mood again." She recognized challenging was an understatement. Mr. Johnson had repeatedly reduced staff to tears. Regardless, Angela methodically prepped herself, determined to meet the challenge. "What are you doing here, girl?" Mr. Johnson spat the moment she walked in. "Didn't I say I don't want no colored nurses messing around with me?" Although her insides clenched, Angela pressed on professionally. "Mr. Johnson," she began, "I need to check vitals and change your dressing. I'm qualified to provide your care." Racist insults rained down on her, but Angela steadily completed her tasks with competence, determined not to stoop in reaction. When she emerged, Dr. Greaves was leaning against the wall, feigning concern. "All okay, Nurse Parker." "I could hear the racket from outside." Keeping her face neutral, she informed him, "Vitals are fine, and his dressing is taken care of." Something like disappointment flashed across his features. "We'll see how long your composure holds. We don't want to hear complaint, do we?" She felt certain that he was pleased to see how rigorously she had been tested. For Angela, the routine repeated relentlessly. She double-checked her every move, knowing even one slip-up will be magnified to feed the prejudices around her. Meanwhile, her white counterparts joked, chatted, and handled fewer responsibilities with far less oversight. Once or twice, Angela considered bringing her concerns forward, but caution stayed her hand. "Don't let them see you falter," she told herself, recalling her mother's advice. Exhausted by the shift, she gathered her possessions at the end of the day, overhearing 2 colleagues grumble, "They're so hung up on these diversity hires. She'll never keep up with the rest of us." Angela clenched her jaw, biting back a rebuttal. Another confrontation would only escalate their negative assumptions. Instead, she left quietly, shoulders burdened by the ongoing strife. Outside, waiting for her bus, Angela noticed Dr. Greaves's sleek black Mercedes pulling up. The window slid down. "Nurse Parker, riding the bus again," he said with a sneer. You poor thing, that's all a nurse can manage, I'm sure. Before she could muster a reply, he sped off. The cruel flippancy of his words struck her like a slap. Angela boarded the bus in steely silence, a tumult of indignation swirling inside her. This dream job had soured into a siege. But something, call it pride or faith, kept her from giving in. She sensed a shift approaching. Would she be crushed under these pressures, or would she drive the hospital to face its own injustices? Angela returned to St. Mary's the next morning with a firmer conviction. Although her environment at work seemed unwelcoming, she needed to refocus on why she chose nursing, to help heal the sick, irrespective of her own troubles. Entering the station, she saw purposeful commotion. Nurses bustled about, preparing for a new patient of considerable importance. Who's being admitted? Angela asked a coworker, who, forgetting to be aloof, answered, a big shot from out of town. Skiing accident. Both arms are broken, they say. Before Angela could ask more, Dr. Greaves showed up, wearing a smile that felt contrived. Nurse Parker, he said, we have a VIP in room 412, Mr. Thomas Edwards. He's sustaining severe injuries, so be sure he receives your utmost care. Angela suspected another deliberate setup. Certainly, doctor, she responded, determined to carry out her duties competently. Approaching room 412, she felt an odd sense of anticipation. Entering, she saw a middle-aged man, arms both in casts. Something about his demeanor suggested calm confidence. No trace of condescension. Good morning, Mr. Edwards, she greeted him warmly. I'm Angela Parker, your nurse for the duration of your stay. Mr. Edwards locked eyes with her, his gaze both inquisitive and kind. Hello, Nurse Parker. I appreciate you looking after me. Never expected this outcome from a ski trip. While she examined his vitals and updated his charts, she noticed him studying her technique closely. Unlike most people in this place, he seemed wholly free of biases. Instead, curiosity lit his eyes. You seem very skilled. How long have you been with St. Mary's? He asked. Surprised by his genuine tone, Angela responded, Only a few weeks, sir. He gave a thoughtful nod. And does the hospital live up to its reputation? I've heard it's top tier. Suddenly unsure how to answer, Angela hesitated. But the moment was broken by Dr. Greaves barging in, face alight with forced geniality. Mr. Edwards, I trust Nurse Parker is meeting your every expectation. We assign only the best nurses to patients of your stature. Angela struggled to maintain a neutral expression. In all her time here, the doctor had never commended her in such a way. Mr. Edwards, perceptive, appeared to register the discrepancy. Yes, indeed, he replied calmly, glancing from the doctor to Angela. She's done an impressive job. I was just asking her about her experiences so far. A flicker of alarm flashed in Dr. Greaves's eyes before he recovered. I'm certain she'll confirm we are entirely inclusive and supportive, he said, voice brimming with disingenuous sweetness. Angela suppressed a rising anger, but kept a professional facade. Edward smiled faintly. Let's see how my stay progresses, he said, focusing on Angela. The conversation ended when Dr. Greaves embarked on explaining the plan for Mr. Edwards' treatment. Even as Angela quietly left to complete other tasks, she sensed something crucial in the encounter. Unlike others, Mr. Edwards appeared to peer beneath the hospital's polished veneer. Day after day, she attended to him, finding in his room a welcome respite from the tension that plagued her everywhere else. He asked about her background, her goals, her upbringing, always listening attentively. Gone was the suspicious edge she'd grown used to. In its place was genuine interest. One afternoon, while performing a routine bandage change for Mr. Edwards, Angela caught heated voices in the corridor. I don't trust that Parker woman with our VIP, someone hissed. Why is Dr. Greaves so convinced she's capable? Another voice said, we can't say anything. We'd be labeled racists. Angela's hand shook slightly as she continued working, hostility cutting deep. Mr. Edwards noticed her shift in mood. Is everything all right, Nurse Parker? She forced a smile, nodding. I'm just focusing on getting these bandages done correctly, Mr. Edwards. He paused, observing her. You know, he said, character is revealed by how one treats others who hold less power. I've seen a great deal from this bed. His remark left Angela speechless. Yet before she could answer, Dr. Greaves entered, effectively ending their conversation. As she left, she felt Mr. Edwards's words resonate. It was as if he saw beyond her forced optimism, perceiving the friction underlying St. Mary's high reputation. She had no idea just how far Mr. Edwards's influence extended or how much of a bombshell his presence would become. As the days passed, Angela felt more marginalized. Rumors circulated, side glances were sharper, and Dr. Greaves increased his efforts to undermine her. He seemed certain she would trip up eventually. One morning, while she was sifting through patient files, Dr. Greaves approached holding a towering stack of charts. "Nurse Parker," he announced with theatrical concern, "these are priority cases for the day. They're complicated, but I'm assuming you can handle them." Glancing at the bundle, Angela saw it contained nearly twice the load given to anyone else. With unwavering calm, she replied, "Certainly, doctor. I'll handle these cases." She glimpsed a smirk as he walked away. "Let's see if she can manage," he murmured under his breath. That day was relentless. Angela raced between urgent calls and critically ill patients, dealing with a whirlwind of tasks, all the while trying to remain unflappable. Tension consumed her, physically and mentally, but she pressed on. During a moment's pause, she overheard two co-workers muttering, "They're burying her under these cases. They must be hoping she'll crack." The other said, "At least you have to respect how she keeps going." "I'd have lost it by now." Angela struggled with anger and sorrow. It stung, realizing everyone saw the unfairness, but just spectated instead of intervening. Nonetheless, Mr. Edwards's room continued to offer her a calm space. Every time she stepped inside, he greeted her with genuine sympathy. "You look tired," he remarked one afternoon when she came in to adjust his four. "Is it always this hectic around here?" Angela responded diplomatically, "It's a busy day, but I'm managing." Concern etched Mr. Edwards's face. "There's a gulf between coping and flourishing," he said, "and from what I've witnessed, you are more than capable if given fair chances." The discrepancy between his empathy and her colleague's coldness made her eyes sting with unshed tears. She swallowed the knot in her throat. "Thank you for that," she murmured. "It means a lot." As she was about to leave, Mr. Edwards added, "Remember, true strength is sometimes about knowing when to speak up." His words echoed in her mind as she returned to the station. Something needed to shift. Could she be the person to force that transition? She wondered if her perseverance would cause the hospital to reveal its failings. The next day, Angela arrived to find an undeniable buzz sweeping across St. Mary's. A major surgery was planned, drawing high-profile visitors and members of the board. Tensions ran high as staff hurriedly got ready. Midway through her morning tasks, Dr. Greaves confronted her with his usual forced civility. "Nurse Parker, we'll need you to assist in the emergency operation. It's a complex case, and I hope you're fully prepared." His voice gave little away, but Angela felt sure it was yet another test. She'd either succeed and perhaps garner respect or stumble, proving her detractors right. Summoning her courage, she replied, "Of course, doctor. I'll do my best." Nothing in his expression hinted that he welcomed her involvement, but he said, "Good," before turning away. Angela then hurried to read up on the patient's condition and meticulously rehearsed every detail she might need in the OR. That afternoon, she donned sterile gear, the adrenaline swirling as the surgical team assembled. The hush in the operating room was thick with anticipation. Dr. Greaves presided over the procedure, speaking in clipped instructions. Angela, at the ready, kept her eyes on the monitors and stepped in when indicated. Everything proceeded smoothly until a complication surfaced unexpectedly. The patient's vital signs wavered, alarms shrieked, and the surgical team tensed. Angela swiftly moved to pass the correct instrument, diagnosing the immediate need. She responded to Dr. Greaves's orders with precision, verifying that the vitals were relayed accurately, ensuring the right medication was administered. Her composure never faltered, even as chaos threatened to break loose around them. At last, Dr. Greaves signaled that the crisis point had passed, and Angela exhaled in relief. Exiting the OR, she was met with hushed stares from the staff, who seemed surprised she'd maintained her calm in the storm. But Dr. Greaves offered only faint praise. "Acceptable work, Nurse Parker," he said, voice devoid of genuine warmth. "Your competence sufficed." Though the compliment was half-hearted, Angela felt a certain vindication. As she removed her gloves, she spotted Mr. Edwards being wheeled by for his daily tests. Their eyes met, and he gave a subtle, encouraging nod. Later that evening, as Angela tidied up her notes, she sensed more eyes on her than usual. Whispers trailed behind her in the corridors, not all of them cutting. Some staff seemed intrigued, reconsidering their initial assumptions about her capabilities. Yet the old guard, led by Dr. Greaves, remained grim-faced, unwilling to let their prejudices go so easily. Slipping outside at the end of her shift, Angela spotted the black Mercedes again. This time it paused briefly by the entrance, then drove away. She wondered if Dr. Greaves had observed her moment of partial triumph and felt threatened by it. The following day, Mr. Edwards made an unusual request. He asked Angela if she could help him write a letter, since both his arms were out of commission. "Of course," Angela said, approaching with a notebook and pen. "Just tell me what to write." He paused, watching her. "Thank you, Nurse Parker." "This is a personal matter," he admitted. "I've come to trust you." She took down his words, which addressed someone named Margaret, referencing upcoming business concerns and the need to arrange an urgent meeting. The note was cryptic but conveyed an urgency that made Angela suspect Mr. Edwards wielded influence beyond the hospital walls. When she finished, he smiled with genuine warmth. "Thank you. I appreciate your discretion." Something told her he was no ordinary man. The respect he accorded her and the commanding calm he exuded hinted that his sphere of influence might soon intersect with the stifled environment at St. Mary's. The staff continued their usual uneasy interplay of gossip and politeness. Dr. Greaves carried on with his attempts to bury Angela under a heavier workload. But she felt, despite it all, an undercurrent shifting. A breeze of possibility skimmed the edges of the hospital's locked-in system. One evening, after a particularly harrowing day, Angela was checking on Mr. Edwards before clocking out. He tapped lightly on the bedside control to shift himself upright. "Nurse Parker," he said in a measured tone, "would you mind telling me candidly what your experience has been here?" She hesitated. "I don't want to seem unprofessional," she said carefully. "I'm just your nurse." He regarded her with compassion. "You're more than just a nurse," he replied. "Everyone in a hospital is part of a bigger chain. If some links are weaker, the entire structure fails. Has St. Mary's failed you?" Angela, tears pricking her eyes, looked down. "It's been hard," she admitted in a low voice. "I love nursing, but I've felt unwelcome. Sometimes, I'm not sure I can last." Mr. Edwards nodded. "I understand. Listen, if you ever need a witness or someone to vouch for you, I'm here. Don't underestimate how much you bring to this place." Grateful but wary, Angela left the room, emotions in a swirl. Her mother's words, her own self-doubt, and the possibility of an ally in Mr. Edwards all jostled in her mind. Could she gather the nerve to challenge the unspoken system that had worn her down? Her chance materialized unexpectedly 2 days later. During an important staff meeting convened to discuss patient outcomes and administrative updates, the head nurse and various department heads were present. Board members, curious about the hospital's performance, also attended. Angela was on the sidelines, listening. Dr. Greaves stood at the head of the table, detailing recent metrics. Then, out of nowhere, Mr. Edwards entered, accompanied by a well-dressed associate. A murmur spread through the room. Board members rose to greet him, revealing the depth of his connections. "Thomas," one of them said, "we weren't expecting you so soon." Ignoring the formality, Mr. Edwards glanced around. "I thought I'd observe how our staff operates." Dr. Greaves looked visibly uneasy, while the others attempted pleasant smiles. Calmly, Mr. Edwards spoke. "I've been recovering here for a while, and I've seen exemplary skill. I've also seen some disturbing behavior that threatens patient care and staff well-being." He paused, letting his words resonate. Angela felt her heart hammering, uncertain if she was about to be implicated or vindicated. Mr. Edwards continued, "I believe in supporting institutions that uphold integrity. When I heard about St. Mary's, it was described as top tier. However, my personal experiences, especially with Nurse Angela Parker, have shown me that not everyone receives the same standard of respect here. A tense silence fell, broken only by a few coughs. The head nurse shifted uncomfortably, while Dr. Greaves opened his mouth, possibly to interrupt, but seemed to think better of it. Turning to Angela, Mr. Edwards addressed the assembly. I've seen Nurse Parker endure hostility that no professional should tolerate, racial slurs from patients, condescension from colleagues, and disproportionate workloads. Yet she remains unwavering. This points to a larger problem. An environment that prides itself on excellence cannot sustain blatant bias. The head nurse attempted a deflection. St. Mary's is an equal opportunity employer, but trailed off under his stern gaze. Mr. Edwards said quietly, "Words are easy. Action is harder." Angela swallowed, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders and intensify at once. Someone was speaking the truth of her experiences in front of those in power. She wondered if retribution would follow, or if this would ignite genuine reform. Sighing audibly, Mr. Edwards placed a hand gently on his cast. I've grown to trust Nurse Parker's competence and compassion. If anyone, she represents the values the hospital should embody. Yet I've observed the culture undermining her at nearly every turn. This is unacceptable. An uncomfortable hush met his statement. A few board members exchanged worried looks. Finally, one cleared her throat and said, "Thomas, your opinions matter a great deal to us. We truly regret if there have been lapses, especially in staff relations." Mr. Edwards kept an unwavering gaze on Dr. Greaves. It's not just lapses. It's a systemic pattern. I'm urging St. Mary's to investigate and address the prejudice in these halls. As the meeting ended, Angela felt a swirl of emotions: relief, fear, astonishment. Board members began ushering Mr. Edwards outside, promising they would act promptly on his concerns. Dr. Greaves and the head nurse hovered uncertainly, conspicuously avoiding Angela's eyes. Once the room cleared, she was left standing there, uncertain what to do next. But some invisible line had been crossed. No one could pretend ignorance anymore. In the subsequent days, a noticeable shift took root. The board appointed an independent team to review hospital practices. Anonymous surveys were circulated, and certain staff members who had blatantly targeted Angela found themselves under scrutiny. Dr. Greaves tried to wear an air of composure, yet his tension was evident. He avoided direct contact with Angela, delegating tasks through intermediaries. Meanwhile, Angela was assigned a more balanced workload, and a few coworkers, perhaps fearful of investigation, became cautiously polite. One afternoon, Angela was called into the head nurse's office. The woman seemed subdued. "Miss Parker," she began, "we're taking steps to assure a better work environment. The board has recommended some changes." Her tone remained stiff, as though forced to deliver a message against her personal inclinations. Angela simply nodded, choosing restraint. "Thank you," she replied politely. "I hope it leads to genuine improvement." Outside the office, she leaned against the wall, heartbeat thumping. She sensed that while the hospital's leadership wanted to placate Mr. Edwards and the board, whether this cultural shift would last was another matter. As for Mr. Edwards, he had quietly continued his own recovery, sometimes leaving the hospital for external appointments. Yet he still found moments to confer with Angela. "Don't let them bury this," he warned her. "This is just the start. Keep the momentum. Document everything." She appreciated his guidance, especially since it came from a place of empathy and pragmatism, not pity. Several colleagues remained frosty, but a few expressed private support. One nurse confided, "This place has needed a shake-up for years. I'm sorry for what you went through, but maybe it'll help us all." Too many silent battles. Angela recognized a spark of hope. Conversations that once fell silent when she approached now occasionally included her. Overhearing talk about formal policies addressing discrimination, she realized that this was no small outcome. A few days later, Angela discovered that Dr. Greaves had been placed on administrative leave pending further inquiry. Rumor had it that board members unearthed a pattern of complaints about his behavior, some from prior staff who had quit. The sense of vindication Angela felt was tempered by sadness at how many had suffered before anything changed. But for the first time, the atmosphere at St. Mary's felt lighter. Late one evening, Angela made her final round to check on Mr. Edwards. He was sitting up, reviewing a file one-handed, with the other cast suspended in a sling. On Nurse Parker, he greeted her with a genial smile. "I've been meaning to speak with you. I'll be discharged soon." Angela nodded, trying to mask her mixed emotions. He had played a decisive role in exposing the hospital's hidden bigotry, and she wondered whether his departure might slow the momentum for reform. He seemed to read her mind. "I've set arrangements in place. People on the board owe me favors, and I'll be keeping an eye on St. Mary's progress. But your role here is vital. You're the living proof this hospital can and must evolve. Never doubt that." Feeling tears threaten, Angela cleared her throat. "Thank you, Mr. Edwards," she whispered. "I honestly don't know if things would have changed without you." He patted her hand gently, with a warmth that recognized both her achievements and her struggles. "You'd have managed, even without me," he said kindly. "Sometimes one voice is all it takes to spark the movement. Other times it takes two." Within the week, Mr. Edwards was discharged. A small group of administrators arrived to shake his hand and wish him well, anxious to keep him appeased. Angela stood a short distance away. He turned and waved her over. "Nurse Parker, join us," he insisted, ignoring the scowling head nurse. She came forward, and he thanked her publicly for her care. Then, leaning in, he murmured, "Carry on the good fight. I'll be watching from a distance." Following his departure, the hospital pressed on. Investigations concluded, leading to new policies, mandatory diversity training, and a staff committee to address complaints. Some employees resisted. Others, relieved that the culture was confronting its flaws, embraced the changes. Over time, subtle transformations took hold. Angela's daily tasks felt more balanced, and she began to forge genuine friendships. Hope replaced her initial dread at entering the building. Weeks later, Angela received a letter with Mr. Edwards' initials on the return address. Inside was a note that read, "Keeping my promise. I trust you're doing the same." It included an update on a new philanthropic project he was spearheading for nursing scholarships, especially for underrepresented groups. She held the letter close, tears in her eyes. He truly understood how vital the next generation of nurses could be. Strolling past the nurses' station, Angela realized how far she'd come. When she arrived, she was relegated to the toughest patients and an avalanche of tasks. Now, her voice carried weight in staff meetings. Some of her old antagonists had departed, or had begun making an effort to treat her professionally. It struck her how a single truth-teller, someone who saw beyond appearances, could crack an entire foundation of prejudice. And it struck her that the real agent of ongoing improvement lay in her own unwavering dedication. St. Mary's still bore scars from years of entrenched bias, but Angela no longer felt alone in her struggle. She found allies in new hires who valued her insights, and in a reformed leadership structure that recognized it could not allow old patterns to fester. Each day, she honored her mother's encouragement, determined to excel not only for her own sake, but for every aspiring nurse who might face similar barriers. At day's end, she walked outside, breathing in the crisp air. Her phone vibrated with a text from her mother, "Proud of you, baby girl." Smiling, she mentally thanked both her mother and Mr. Edwards. They had each, in different ways, propelled her forward. She no longer stared warily at the entrance of St. Mary's General Hospital. She headed inside with purpose. Her story, once rife with rejection, had become a testament to the power of perseverance. In the months that followed, the hospital continued to adapt. Instances of overt prejudice decreased. The newly formed board-level oversight group convened quarterly, examining staff relations and collecting feedback, ensuring that no single voice was ignored. Angela's colleagues, from novices to seasoned professionals, gradually realized that inclusivity and high standards go hand in hand. Patients seemed to notice the difference too. There were warmer interactions in the halls, fewer tense silences. Occasionally, Angela recalled Dr. Greaves's sneering remarks and the first day's conversation halting hush. She would compare those memories with her current reality, a place that still had flaws, yet was slowly growing more welcoming for all. It wasn't perfect, but the shift was palpable. She resolved to remain vigilant, knowing complacency could unravel their progress. Vigilance was necessary so that future nurses of color wouldn't face the same uphill battles she had. After finishing a busy yet fulfilling shift, Angela stood once again at the bus stop. But this time, she felt a sense of pride rather than dread. A familiar black Mercedes cruised by, someone else's car, not Dr. Greaves's. The memory no longer haunted her. With a calm sense of victory, she boarded the bus, her heart light. She clutched Mr. Edwards's letter, a subtle but potent reminder that she was valued, that her competence mattered, and that progress can be sparked by a single determined individual. Over dinner that evening, she and her mother spoke by phone. "I'm doing okay, Mama," she said, voice warm with relief. "It's not the place it was when I started." Her mother's voice beamed through the line. "I knew you'd bring about change. That's who you are, Angela." Her mother's unwavering faith reminded her of the unbreakable bond that had always carried her through hardships. She was living proof of that inherited resilience. With new hospital practices in place and more open dialogue, Angela could now focus wholly on her calling, providing first-rate care. Time would march on, and new challenges would inevitably appear, but Angela Parker had discovered her voice. No longer did she slink away from hushed whispers or hateful remarks. She had proven to herself and to others that she belonged. She was as qualified, if not more so, than many who had tried to dismiss her. The hospital's transformation was far from finished, but Angela's growth was unstoppable. The hushed halls of St. Mary's were no longer suffused with the same biting tension. Instead, they hummed with the promise of something better. She recognized that sometimes, institutional change must be forced into the light by convergence of opportunity and courage. For St. Mary's, that convergence had arrived via a devoted nurse who refused to be beaten down, and an enigmatic patient whose status and keen observation peeled back the veneer of prejudice. The outcome? A slow but significant pivot toward equity and respect. If asked to recount the turning point, Angela would trace it to those first steps she took along the pristine floor, the moment she felt the hospital's chilled stare and decided, despite fear, she would not relent. She would also credit the day Mr. Edwards insisted on praising her competence in front of those who doubted her. In the end, her presence in those corridors symbolized victory against outdated notions. She stood as a testament to anyone who chose compassion and fortitude in the face of hostility. And so the final lesson was laid bare. Real strength involves more than surviving adversity. It also encompasses dismantling the adversarial structures themselves. Angela, in her unassuming way, had done exactly that. She had not only withstood but also reshaped the place that had once sought to undermine her. In doing so, she honored those who had paved the way for her, and she cleared a path for those who would come after. In that sense, the story of St. Mary's General Hospital served as a mirror for countless organizations across the nation, places that might outwardly proclaim diversity but inwardly fail to nurture it. Angela's victory underscored that transformation, while often slow and painful, can indeed occur, given enough resolve and the right catalyst. Thomas Edwards had arrived as a seemingly average patient, yet turned out to be the impetus for critical scrutiny and action. Ultimately, Angela Parker emerged triumphant, a survivor no longer content merely to endure, but determined to thrive. Today, the halls of St. Mary's bear traces of her influence. New nurses, including several who share her background, joined the ranks, met not with frigid aloofness but with understanding and cooperation. Many remain cautious, but the shift is real, and Angela stands at the forefront of this unfolding chapter. She has discovered her calling anew, not solely as a caretaker of patients, but as a proponent of equity and empathy within the healthcare system she loves. Indeed, adversity had tested her. Cold shoulders, veiled scorn, the weight of impossible tasks, and relentless microaggressions. Yet ironically, it was that adversity which uncovered her deeper capacity to drive positive change. The next time an aspiring black nurse with radiant hope in her eyes steps through those doors, Angela will be there, lending a guiding hand so that no one else will traverse that perilous path alone. This quiet but profound revolution, born from an unexpected alliance between one beleaguered nurse and an astute patient, affirms that sometimes justice and healing emerge from the most unanticipated corners. Angela's narrative, interwoven with Mr. Edwards's unexpected role, illustrates that compassion joined with conviction can topple structures of prejudice, even in polished, progressive settings. Hers is not simply one nurse's journey, but rather a clarion call reminding us that the greatest of changes might come from those who dare to stand firm against the silent tide of opposition. And in that enduring pursuit of justice, each day at St. Mary's now feels like a chance to make her mother's words ring true. Never let them see you falter. If you follow this story to its culmination, reflect on your own surroundings. Are there silent storms waiting to be confronted? Sometimes all it takes is a single voice, someone unafraid to defy oppressive norms, to galvanize an entire institution into action. The road is fraught with stumbling blocks and potential backlash, but as Angela Parker's journey demonstrates, the outcome can lead to a recalibration of values. The transformation of St. Mary's, incomplete but tangible, is testament to the power of integrity and unity. So here we stand, concluding this account of a hospital once defined by prestige and concealed prejudices. Thanks to a steadfast nurse determined to excel against all odds, and quiet yet influential patient observing from his bed, the facade cracked to reveal urgent truths. With these revelations came renewed hope and a plan for systemic change. May this story linger in the minds of all who read it, urging us to keep speaking, keep questioning, and keep believing that, indeed, a single stand against injustice may trigger waves of reform that reach far beyond one institution's walls. There was an ulterior motive, of course. "Dr. Greaves," she replied, keeping her voice steady, "I'll be ready." As he walked away, Angela heard him muttering to another doctor, "Let's see how she handles the pressure. This should be interesting." The hours leading up to the operation became a blur of both anticipation and meticulous preparation. Angela immersed herself in her duties, double and triple checking every detail to ensure she was fully equipped for the challenges she suspected might arise. While scrubbing in for the surgery, she could not help but notice the skeptical glances from certain staff members. She breathed deeply, summoning the strength to remember her mother's injunction. "Don't you dare let them see you falter." The operation commenced. Angela was positioned alongside Dr. Greaves and several other senior physicians. The tension permeating the room was almost tangible. It was common knowledge that important observers were closely monitoring every move the team made, intensifying the already formidable pressure. In the midst of these difficult circumstances, Angela remained poised. Her movements were deliberate and precise, demonstrating a readiness that spoke to her years of experience. She identified what each surgeon required, providing instruments even before they requested them, her training and skill shining through in every gesture. However, during the course of the operation, Angela noticed something that caused her heart to pound. Dr. Greaves, usually so self-assured, appeared unsure. His hands wavered slightly as he prepared for a critical incision. In that split second, Angela realized that he was about to commit a potentially disastrous error. Acting quickly, she spoke up, her voice resolute yet calm. "Dr. Greaves," she said, "perhaps we should consider a different angle. The patient's anatomy suggests it might be safer." The entire room fell silent, every eye fixed on her. Surprise and indignation flickered on Dr. Greaves's face, and Angela braced herself for him to dismiss her. Yet, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. Adjusting his approach based on her suggestion, he proceeded with the incision. It soon became evident that Angela's intervention had likely safeguarded the patient's life. When the surgery concluded successfully, Angela sensed countless eyes upon her. Some regarded her with a new respect, while others, most notably Dr. Greaves, seemed to simmer with thinly veiled animosity. As the team began to clean up, Dr. Greaves spoke to Angela in a low, menacing tone. "Nurse Parker, I need you to see me in private. Right now." Heart pounding, Angela followed him from the operating room. She understood that, despite doing the right thing, she might expect his conduct to be fully scrutinized. He was not only grossly unprofessional, but also allowed prejudice to place patient safety at risk. Recognizing the grave stakes, the administrator nodded anxiously. "Yes, Mr. Edwards, of course. We'll start these reforms right away." Word spread throughout St. Mary's like lightning that this patient was the CEO of a major healthcare system, bringing about immediate, dramatic changes. Fear, apprehension, and even hope coursed through the corridors. Angela, initially reeling from all that had happened, found herself in the center of a hurricane. Staff members who previously shunned her or offered only scorn now approached her hesitantly, some seeking forgiveness, some eager to understand how the new rules would alter their daily routines. Near the end of her shift, Angela stopped by Mr. Edwards's room. He was propped up against the pillows, appearing weary but satisfied. Nurse Parker, he greeted her with a smile. I've taken the liberty of recommending you for a position on the new Diversity and Inclusion Committee. Your voice and insight will be invaluable. Overcome with gratitude, Angela felt tears pricking at her eyes. Thank you, Mr. Edwards, she managed. I appreciate this more than you know. He shook his head. No, thank you. Your professionalism under such hostile conditions reaffirms the ideals that led me to healthcare in the first place, to make a genuine difference. Walking out into the twilight, Angela experienced a sense of cautious optimism. A new day was dawning at St. Mary's, and she had the slightest inkling that real change was at last possible. That sense of possibility soon morphed into a flurry of action. The following week, St. Mary's General Hospital found itself under an intense spotlight. Mr. Edwards's declarations had rattled the institution to its core, unveiling decades-long biases beneath its gleaming exterior. Early on Monday, as Angela arrived, she saw news vans gathered outside, reporters hungry for statements. Inside, tensions ran high. Employees whispered in hushed circles. The building felt electrified with anticipation. From the corner of her eye, Angela saw Dr. Greaves being escorted by security toward the administration wing. He gave her one final furious glance before disappearing behind closed doors. The hospital's intercom crackled. All staff, please report to the main auditorium in 30 minutes for an urgent meeting. Attendance is mandatory. When Angela entered the auditorium, it was already packed. She chose a seat near the back. Ahead, she could see Mr. Edwards, now dressed in a crisp suit despite his arms still in casts, conferring with the administrator and several other officials. Once the crowd settled, Mr. Edwards stepped to the lectern, quiet authority radiating from him. The hush was nearly complete. Good morning, he began. For those who may not know me yet, I'm Thomas Edwards, CEO of Healthcare United. While recuperating here, I've closely observed St. Mary's operational and cultural practices, and I must say I'm deeply troubled by what I've encountered. He surveyed the room. I witnessed blatant bias and hostility that conflict with modern healthcare standards. Let me be very clear. The experiences of Nurse Angela Parker are not anomalies. They are evidence of a broader problem that cannot and will not be ignored any longer. At the mention of Angela's name, many heads turned. She inhaled a steadying breath, returning their gazes with as much composure as she could. Mr. Edwards continued, announcing an immediate overhaul of hospital policy, including a deep investigation into discriminatory incidents, compulsory training on workplace inclusivity, and a systematic reevaluation of how staff were hired, assigned, and promoted. Then his tone became steely. Those found guilty of discriminatory behavior will face serious repercussions, starting with Dr. William Greaves, who is being placed on suspension pending a full review of his actions. Another ripple of murmuring swept through the crowd. Angela caught a glimpse of a few staff members who had aligned themselves with Dr. Greaves. They now appeared anxious and uncertain. Others looked quietly relieved. I recognize these changes may be difficult, Mr. Edwards said, but this isn't only a moral imperative. A diverse and respectful environment improves outcomes for both patients and providers. Pausing, he added, finally, I have one more announcement. In light of recent events and her admirable resilience, Nurse Angela Parker has consented to serve as Chief Diversity Officer at St. Mary's. She will help guide these crucial transformations. A surge of conflicting emotions washed over Angela, shock, pride, and a jolt of apprehension. She had expected only to serve on the committee, not to become the point person for this institutional shift. But applause roiled through the room, some of it genuine, some perhaps more tentative. Mr. Edwards beckoned her forward, and she made her way to the podium. She could see curiosity, caution, and a measure of respect reflected in her colleagues' faces. Collecting herself, she spoke into the microphone. Thank you, Mr. Edwards. And to everyone here, I want to say this. I'm not your adversary, but your colleague. I believe that St. Mary's has immense potential. I've dedicated myself to patient care because I truly love what we do. If we unite around respect and inclusion, we can provide top-level care for every patient and ensure every staff member feels supported. Scanning the auditorium, She noted that even those who had once been cold or dismissive seemed to pay attention. After the meeting, people approached her hesitantly, some with apologies, others with heartfelt congratulations. Meanwhile, as news of the changes spread, an air of possibility enveloped St. Mary's. There was still tension, but also newfound hope. That evening, while packing up her things, Angela encountered Mr. Edwards near the front exit. He smiled. Or should I say Chief Diversity Officer Parker? How are you holding up? She exhaled a laugh. It's been a whirlwind, Mr. Edwards. I'm trying to catch my breath. He nodded sympathetically. I realize this is a huge transition, but I have absolute confidence in you. Your courage is precisely what St. Mary's needs. Strolling out together into the evening air, Mr. Edwards grew serious. You should be aware, this movement won't stop at St. Mary's. I intend to implement similar changes throughout Healthcare United. Angela, your story could inspire an industry-wide shift in how we address diversity and inclusion. Though the weight of that prospect was substantial, it also galvanized Angela. I'm prepared, she promised. Together, we can make a real impact. Within days, the environment at St. Mary's transformed. With Mr. Edwards' backing and Angela's appointment, a wave of reforms washed through the hospital. Staff were required to attend diversity workshops, and some initially resisted. Dr. Greaves underwent a rigorous inquiry and was, in the end, dismissed, signaling that discriminatory practices would no longer be condoned. Curiously, as the institution's culture evolved, Angela's profile rose as well. She began receiving requests to speak at medical conferences to discuss strategies for creating more inclusive healthcare settings. Nearly a year after Mr. Edwards had first confronted Dr. Greaves, Angela addressed an auditorium brimming with professionals. A year ago, she began, I was a nurse ready to walk away from everything. Today, I'm standing here as living proof that real transformation is not just possible, but necessary. She recounted the narrative of St. Mary's, highlighting the trials and the triumphs, the hardships and the breakthroughs. She spoke honestly about the hostility, but also about the renewed hope that resulted from determined action and leadership. At the conclusion of her talk, Mr. Edwards recovered fully from his accident, approached her with a grin. Angela, you're worlds away from the exhausted nurse I met in that hospital bed a year ago. They chatted about St. Mary's ongoing progress. Mr. Edwards expressed how other hospitals under Healthcare United had begun enacting similar policies, with some experiencing early positive results. When I arrived at St. Mary's, I never imagined that a simple stay could ignite such a profound sequence of events, he said. You reaffirmed my conviction that healthcare truly can be a force for societal good. Back at St. Mary's, Angela received a warm greeting from Sarah, an individual who had once kept her distance but was now a supportive ally. The hospital seemed more alive than ever, with new lines of communication bridging staff members who had once been isolated or competitive. A fresh mural in the foyer depicted a diverse team of healthcare professionals, accompanied by the words, "Diversity is our strength. Inclusion is our commitment. Compassion is our calling." It was a visual testament to how far they had come. Settling into her new office, Angela took a moment to consider the magnitude of the changes. The corridors no longer felt oppressive. Staff who previously whispered behind her back now sought her out for collaboration. The environment had turned from toxic to open-minded, although plenty of work remained. Angela drew solace from the knowledge that she wasn't alone in this endeavor. The administration, new committees, and numerous staff were all behind her in this crusade. Smiling, she realized it was only the beginning. Building a truly inclusive system wouldn't be instantaneous, but so many steps had already been taken. Every day, her phone pinged with messages from other hospitals requesting consultations. The story of St. Mary's was becoming a beacon, urging others to evaluate their own structures. It wasn't about top-down enforcement alone, but also grassroots empowerment, ensuring that every individual felt valued and motivated to contribute to a safer, more respectful workplace. Angela concluded her first day in her new role by visiting the bustling reception area. The negativity that used to cling to the air was gone. In its place, she detected cautious optimism. Reflecting on the last chaotic year, she marveled at how a simple act of speaking up mid-surgery had kindled an unstoppable chain reaction. She had stood up for patient safety and her own integrity, not realizing it would catch the eye of an unexpectedly influential ally. Glancing at the mural again, Angela thought of her mother's words, "Don't you dare let them see you falter." She hadn't. And in not faltering, she had turned adversity into advocacy. Even Dr. Greaves, ironically, had served as a catalyst for unveiling the hospital's hidden prejudices. Now, as a direct outcome, countless professionals would be spared the same toxic environment. Angela felt a deep sense of responsibility and also a profound gratitude. Stepping outside, she spotted Mr. Edwards talking on his phone. When he caught sight of her, he gave a little wave, then finished his call. "I'm finalizing details to launch new training protocols at several Healthcare United facilities," he explained, sounding energized. "It's all happening so quickly. I can hardly believe it." Angela regarded him with sincere appreciation. "I can believe it," she said softly. "You saw an injustice and used your influence to confront it. That's exactly what real leadership should look like." In truth, Mr. Edwards had ignited a movement that Angela was now helping to shape. "Thank you again," she added. "Not just for championing me, but for championing every nurse and doctor who's ever felt marginalized." He smiled, shaking his head modestly. "It was your courage that pushed me to act," he pointed out. "I just had the platform to amplify your voice. Working together, we're making a difference." A short while later, Angela reflected on how everything started. A skiing accident, a chance admission, a conscientious nurse, and one mistake narrowly averted in the operating room. The synergy of those events had triggered a seismic shift. While some at St. Mary's had resisted these changes, the majority now felt that the institution was stronger, safer, and better equipped to serve its diverse community. Patients, noticing the new vibe, reported feeling more welcomed and cared for by the staff. As the months rolled by, the transformations at St. Mary's continued to deepen. The hospital saw new hires from a wide array of backgrounds, more balanced patient assignments, and an uptick in morale surveys. Angela's leadership style was lauded for compassion balanced with clarity. She never hesitated to call out lapses or hesitations that threatened their newfound progress. And in weekly committee meetings, she tirelessly emphasized the significance of sustaining an environment open to honest feedback. It wasn't unusual for Angela to arrive early and leave late. The work was demanding, at times overwhelming, but she found it purposeful. One evening, while gathering her notes, a younger nurse approached, eyes bright with admiration. "Thank you for paving the way," the young nurse said softly. "I hear stories about how it was before, and I'm just grateful I started now." Angela's heart swelled. "We still have a distance to go," she reminded gently, "but I'm glad you feel welcome. That's what I want for everyone here." When she returned to her office, she spotted a handwritten note on her desk. The note read, "Thank you for speaking at the diversity conference. Your story is an inspiration." Angela smiled. She recalled how frightened and alone she'd felt in those early weeks. Her credentials doubted at every turn. Now she was traveling nationwide to share insights on creating more inclusive medical centers. In her quieter moments, Angela traced this journey back to that crucial day in the operating room. She had risked everything, challenging Dr. Greaves to avert a grave medical error, and her life had changed irreversibly. Part of her still reeled at how quickly events had escalated. Another part recognized that if one were to rewrite the story of St. Mary's, that single moment of moral courage was the pivotal chapter. Eventually, Mr. Edwards was fully discharged, returning to his robust schedule. Yet he remained a frequent visitor, checking on the hospital's progress and offering behind-the-scenes support. The partnership between him and Angela continued to shape strategic initiatives, with St. Mary's now serving as a prototype for other facilities. On the anniversary of Mr. Edwards's dramatic confrontation with Dr. Greaves, a small celebration was arranged, complete with speeches and words of gratitude. Angela, at first, demurred about standing in front of everyone again, but the staff insisted. They wanted to thank her for what she had done. Gathering in a large conference room, the staff gave her a standing ovation. She cleared her throat, feeling unexpectedly emotional. "A year ago, I nearly left nursing altogether," she admitted. "But I stayed, and I spoke up. We discovered an ally we never expected." Gesturing toward Mr. Edwards, she continued. His presence forced everyone to see truths that had been lurking out in the open. "Because of that, we're a stronger institution now, committed to ensuring that dignity and respect are never optional here." Some staffers dabbed at their eyes. Others nodded fervently. She concluded, "I want each of you to remember, if you see something wrong, call it out. It doesn't matter who you are or what rank you hold. Your voice matters." The applause that followed reflected genuine admiration. With renewed vigor, Angela continued striving for enduring improvements. Hiring committees got broader input, staff resource groups were formed, and a wave of new applicants arrived, wanting to work in a place known for championing inclusion. In turn, patient reviews became increasingly positive, praising the hospital's comforting atmosphere and attentive care. Months later, as Angela closed out her day, she recorded a short reflection. She spoke about progress made. "We are still unraveling the old prejudices, still learning to see one another's value. But each conversation shifts us forward. Each step of accountability and empathy is forging a legacy that I hope will last beyond any single leadership change." Exiting St. Mary's, she cast a final glance back at the glowing building. The possibility of an even brighter future emanated from every window. In her darkest hour, she had felt alone and overwhelmed. Now she walked away proud, confident that no one else would have to endure that same isolation. The seeds of transformation had taken root, and while storms might come, the foundations were infinitely stronger. What moment in Angela's journey resonated with you the most? Was it her unwavering resolve amid systematic bias, or Mr. Edwards's unexpected role as a catalyst for hospital-wide reform? Feel free to share your reflections in the comments below. If you found value in this retelling, please subscribe to my channel. I pour my heart into constructing these uplifting stories, and your support keeps me going. I'm grateful for every one of you who has joined me on this path. Reordered text ends.